Most people will listen to this and still miss it. Not because it's complicated, but because it's uncomfortable. Because if what I'm about to say really sinks in, you can't go back to blaming your past, your parents, your luck, or the system. You'll realize that the life you're living right now is not an accident. It's a reflection of what you tolerate, what you repeat, and what you refuse to control. Think about this for a moment. If someone watched your thoughts for one day, listened to your words for 1 week, and tracked your spending for 1 month, they would know exactly where your life is headed. No motivation speech, no book, no secret strategy can override that pattern. And that's the part most people don't want to face. Because control sounds restrictive until you realize the alternative is chaos. An undisciplined mind keeps you anxious and distracted. An uncontrolled mouth costs you respect and leverage. And emotional money decisions quietly lock you into a future you didn't consciously choose. None of this happens overnight. That's why it's so dangerous. It feels normal while it's slowly costing you everything. What if the reason you feel stuck isn't because you need more information, but because you've been avoiding responsibility? What if freedom doesn't come from doing whatever you want, but from mastering the parts of yourself that keep sabotaging you? That idea alone separates those who grow from those who stay trapped. Stay with this until the end, because this isn't about becoming perfect. It's about becoming precise. About learning where real power actually lies. And once you see how your mind, your words, and your money are shaping your destiny, you won't be able to unsee it. The question is not whether this will challenge you. It will. The question is whether you're ready to take control, or keep living on autopilot. Most people think their biggest problem is the world outside of them, the economy, other people, bad luck, but the truth is far less comfortable. The real battle is happening quietly inside their own head, every single day. And most people are losing it without even realizing they're at war. Your mind is not designed to make you successful. It's designed to keep you comfortable. That distinction changes everything. Comfort wants ease, familiarity, and immediate relief. Growth demands tension, focus, and delayed reward. When you don't understand this, you start mistaking comfort for wisdom. You follow every thought that feels urgent. You obey every emotion that feels loud. And slowly, without drama, your potential gets negotiated away. Here's something rarely said out loud: not every thought deserves your respect. Your mind produces thoughts the same way your lungs produce air. Automatically, constantly, without asking permission. Some of those thoughts are useful. Many of them are noise. And a dangerous number of them are lies dressed up as logic. I'll start tomorrow. I'm just not in the mood. This isn't the right time. Those thoughts feel reasonable. They sound mature, but they are often fear trying to sound intelligent. An uncontrolled mind turns feelings into commands. If you feel tired, you stop. If you feel bored, you quit. If you feel discouraged, you retreat. Over time, this trains your nervous system to associate discomfort with danger. You begin to avoid effort, avoid responsibility, avoid growth. Not because you're weak, but because you never learned how to sit with discomfort without obeying it. Mental control is not about suppressing thoughts. It's about creating distance from them. The moment you can say, I notice this thought, but I don't have to act on it, you regain authority. That pause, that small gap between impulse and action, is where power lies. Without it you are reactive. With it you are deliberate. People admire discipline, but few understand what it actually is. Discipline is not intensity, it's not motivation, it's not hype. Discipline is the quiet decision to act according to principle rather than mood. It's choosing what matters most over what feels good right now. And that choice is almost always uncomfortable in the beginning. Your mind will resist structure before it rewards it. At first, focus feels heavy. Silence feels awkward. Consistency feels boring. But boredom is not the enemy, it's the gateway. On the other side of boredom is mastery. On the other side of distraction is clarity. The people who win are not the ones who avoid boredom, they're the ones who outlast it. There's a reason distraction is everywhere: notifications, opinions, outrage, endless content. A distracted mind is easier to influence, easier to sell to, easier to control. When your attention is scattered, your life becomes fragmented. You start many things but finish few. You react to everything but build nothing. Mental control begins with protecting your attention like it's your most valuable asset, because it is. Focus is not about doing more, It's about doing less, better. It's the courage to ignore what doesn't align with your long-term vision. And that requires clarity. If you don't decide who you want to become, your mind will default to who it has always been. Change doesn't happen by accident. It happens when intention replaces habit. One of the hardest truths to accept is that your mind will often try to pull you back to familiar versions of yourself, even when they no longer serve you. Growth threatens identity. When you begin to evolve, your mind asks, "Who am I if I'm no longer this person?" And to avoid that uncertainty, it will tempt you with old patterns, old excuses, old comforts. Mental control means choosing evolution over familiarity. Stress is another place where people misunderstand control. They think calm comes from eliminating pressure. In reality, calm comes from competence, from knowing you can handle discomfort without collapsing, from trusting yourself to respond rather than react. A controlled mind doesn't panic under pressure because it has rehearsed discipline long before the moment arrived. You don't rise to the occasion, you fall to the level of your training. If your mind is trained in avoidance, it will avoid. If it's trained in focus, it will focus. Every small act of discipline is a vote for the person you're becoming. Every time you finish what you start, even when it's inconvenient, you reinforce self-trust. And self-trust is the foundation of confidence. Here's a subtle but powerful shift: stop asking yourself how you feel, and start asking what's required. Feelings change by the hour, requirements don't. When you anchor your actions to principles instead of emotions, your life becomes stable, even when your mood is not. This is how high performers remain consistent while others remain chaotic. Mental control also means learning when to disengage. Not every thought needs to be explored. Not every worry needs a solution. Some thoughts fade when you stop feeding them attention. Rumination feels productive, but it's often just anxiety recycling itself. A disciplined mind knows when to think and when to move. And understand this mental strength is built in private, in moments no one sees. When you choose not to check your phone, when you return to the task, when you sit with silence, these moments don't feel heroic, they feel small. But small decisions, repeated daily, shape the architecture of your mind. Over time, something remarkable happens. The mind that once resisted effort begins to crave structure. Focus becomes natural, clarity replaces chaos. You stop needing external motivation because your identity has shifted. You no longer ask, "Do I feel like doing this?" You ask, "Is this aligned with who I am?" That's the turning point. When discipline becomes self-respect. When focus becomes freedom. When control stops feeling restrictive and starts feeling expansive. Because the ultimate truth is this: the mind you don't control will cost you everything you want. But the mind you discipline will give you something far more valuable than success. It will give you command over yourself. And once you have that, the rest of life stops feeling like a struggle and starts feeling like a choice. Once you begin to understand how the mind works, the next discipline reveals itself almost immediately: the mouth. Because what you say is often the fastest way to give away the control you worked so hard to build internally. Words are not neutral. They carry weight, intention, and consequence, whether you acknowledge it or not. And the uncomfortable truth is that most people speak far more than they think, and think far less than they speak. Speech feels harmless because it's easy. It costs nothing in the moment. But over time, careless words become expensive. They shape reputations, define relationships, and lock people into identities they never consciously chose. Your mouth, unchecked, becomes a public broadcast of your emotional state. And when emotions are in charge of speech, authority disappears. One of the clearest indicators of inner control is verbal restraint. Not silence out of fear, but silence out of awareness. The ability to pause before responding. The discipline to let a moment pass without filling it with noise. This is not weakness. It is strength that understands timing. Most people mistake speed for confidence. In reality, composure is what earns respect. Every conversation is a subtle negotiation of power. When you over-explain, you lower your position. When you argue emotionally, you hand control to the other person. When you defend yourself against every perceived slight, you communicate insecurity. A controlled mouth does not rush to prove. It allows reality to speak. There is a psychological reason people talk too much. Silence creates space, and space forces self-awareness. Talking fills that space and delays discomfort. But growth lives in that discomfort. When you resist the urge to speak immediately, you gain information. You observe tone, intention, and context. You hear what is actually being said, not just what triggers you emotionally. A disciplined speaker understands that not every truth needs to be voiced, and not every thought needs to be shared. Honesty without wisdom becomes recklessness. Clarity without restraint becomes arrogance. True communication is not about expression alone, it's about impact. The question is never just, is this true, but, is this useful, necessary, and timely? Anger is where the mouth does the most damage. Anger sharpens the tongue and narrows perception. In that state, words are used as weapons rather than tools. And while anger feels powerful in the moment, it often creates consequences that last far longer than the emotion itself. The person who speaks in anger rarely wins, they simply reveal. Control here means recognizing that silence can be a response. Not every provocation requires engagement. Not every challenge deserves acknowledgement. Sometimes the most authoritative thing you can say is nothing at all. When you do that, you deny others the reaction they are often seeking, and you keep your own integrity intact. Consider how people speak about their lives. Many unknowingly rehearse their limitations out loud. They repeat stories of failure, betrayal, or injustice until those narratives become fixed identities. Language shapes perception. When you repeatedly verbalize defeat, your mind begins to accept it as truth. A controlled mouth does not reinforce helplessness, it reinforces responsibility. This does not mean pretending everything is fine. It means choosing words that move you forward rather than trap you in the past. It means describing challenges without glorifying them. It means speaking about goals with